The crystal chandeliers of the Westwood Hotel cast fractured light across the polished marble floor, where Seattle's wealthiest moved in practiced circles of power and influence. 28-year-old Malene Foster smoothed the fabric of her simple black dress, the only formal piece she owned, and told herself she belonged here, at least professionally. As a sign language interpreter contracted for the Seattle Children's Hospital Charity Gala, she was staff, not guest, a distinction her empty bank account reminded her of daily. Her agency coordinator's words echoed in her mind: blend in, stay available, don't make waves. So far, no one had needed her services, leaving Malene feeling like a shadow among the glittering crowd. The ballroom hummed with conversation and laughter. Women in designer gowns held champagne flutes with manicured hands. Men in tailored suits discussed business deals and stock portfolios. Malene recognized faces from newspaper society pages: tech executives, philanthropists, old Seattle money mixing with new. She moved along the perimeter, professionally invisible, watching for any sign that someone might need interpretation services. That's when she spotted her. In the far corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a marble column, stood a teenage girl in a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than Malene's monthly rent. While everyone around her laughed and chatted animatedly, the girl remained silent, her eyes watchful and intelligent. Despite her designer gown and the diamond studs glinting in her ears, something in her posture spoke volumes to Malene. The slight tension in her shoulders, the careful way she observed people's lips, the isolation that hung around her like an invisible wall. The girl was deaf, and no one was talking to her. Malene's trained eye caught the subtle signs immediately: the way the girl's gaze fixed on speakers' mouths, the alert stillness of someone accustomed to reading a room through vision alone, the careful distance she maintained from the crowd's chaos. It was a posture Malene had seen countless times in her work, but never in a setting quite like this. Before Malene could make her way toward the girl, a ripple of excitement surged through the crowd. Conversations paused mid-sentence, heads turned toward the grand entrance. Even the orchestra seemed to play with renewed vigor. Adrian DeLuca had arrived. Malene had heard the name, of course. Everyone in Seattle had. The DeLuca family had been part of the city's fabric for 3 generations, their influence woven through the waterfront, construction, import businesses, enterprises that carried weight in both legitimate circles and the shadowed spaces between. Adrian DeLuca himself was spoken of in careful tones, a man whose charitable donations opened hospital wings while his very presence could silence a room. He entered not with fanfare, but with an authority that needed no announcement. Tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps in his early 40s, he wore a black suit cut so perfectly it seemed painted on. No tie, just a crisp white shirt open at the collar. His dark hair showed traces of gray at the temples, and his face held the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from experience rather than youth. 2 men in dark suits flanked him at a respectful distance, their eyes constantly scanning the room. They didn't look like typical security. They moved with a different kind of purpose. The crowd parted naturally as DeLuca moved through the ballroom. People approached him with careful deference, shaking his hand, exchanging brief words. Malene noticed how he never raised his voice, how people leaned in to hear him speak. His movements were economical, deliberate. When photographers called his name, he acknowledged them with a slight nod, but didn't smile for the cameras. This wasn't a man who performed for attention. Attention came to him whether he wanted it or not. "Mr. DeLuca, thank you for your generous donation," the hospital administrator gushed, practically tripping over himself to shake DeLuca's hand. "The new pediatric wing will change countless lives." "Children deserve proper care," DeLuca replied, his voice low and measured. It wasn't a statement that invited further comment, it was simply fact. He moved on before the administrator could continue his praise. Malene watched this interaction, then glanced back at the girl in blue. The teenager stood straighter now, her eyes fixed on DeLuca with an expression Malene recognized immediately: pride mixed with resignation, longing tangled with hurt. She watched him the way a child watches a parent who's always just out of reach. The connection was unmistakable. The girl had to be his daughter. DeLuca worked the room with quiet efficiency, but not once did his gaze drift toward the corner where his daughter stood. Not once did anyone approach the girl to include her in the evening's festivities. She remained alone, a beautiful ornament displayed but never touched. Malene made her decision. She crossed the ballroom, weaving between clusters of guests, her heart beating faster with each step. As she neared, the girl's eyes widened slightly in surprise at being directly approached. Up close, Malene could see she was perhaps 17, with her father's dark coloring and a face that held both youth and a weariness no teenager should possess. "Hello," Malene signed, her hands forming the greeting with practiced ease. "I'm Malene. What's your name?" The transformation was instant and heartbreaking. The careful mask of polite indifference fell away, replaced by a smile of such genuine delight that it made Malene's chest tighten. How long had it been since someone had communicated with this girl in her own language? "I'm Olivia," she signed back, her movements quick and elegant, full of life. "You know ASL? Are you deaf too?" "No," Malene replied, her fingers dancing through the signs. "I'm an interpreter. I work at the children's hospital sometimes." "The one my father donated to," Olivia signed, a flicker of something complicated passing across her face. "I'm supposed to stand here and look pretty for the photos later. That's my main job at these things." The bitterness in her expression told Malene everything she needed to know about Olivia's role in her father's world. "Well, until then," Malene signed, "would you like some company that actually talks to you?" Olivia's laugh was silent but expressive, her whole face lighting up. "God, yes, I've been watching people's lips all night until my eyes hurt. Do you know how many people here have asked me if I can read their lips and then they exaggerate everything like I'm 5 years old?" Malene smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. "Or they shout because apparently being deaf also means you're stupid." "Exactly!" Olivia's movements became animated, her earlier stiffness melting away. "Or my personal favorite, when they find out I'm deaf, they immediately start talking to whoever's with me instead, as if I've suddenly become invisible." As they conversed, Malene watched Olivia's transformation. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes brightened. The careful control slipped away, revealing a sharp, funny, intelligent young woman who'd been starved for real conversation. They talked about everything and nothing: school, art, the ridiculous ice sculptures shaped like hospital equipment that decorated the buffet tables. "I'm in my senior year," Olivia explained when Malene asked about school. "I go to Westridge Academy. It's a mainstream school, but they have a deaf program." "Do you have many friends there?" Malene asked. Olivia's hands hesitated, her expression clouding. "Not really. The hearing kids think I'm stuck up because I'm DeLuca's daughter. The deaf kids think I'm too privileged to understand their struggles. I don't really fit anywhere." "That sounds lonely," Malene replied honestly. "It is what it is." Olivia shrugged with studied casualness that didn't quite hide the pain beneath. "At least I have my art. I paint. Actually, I'm pretty good at it." "I'd love to see your work sometime," Malene told her. Across the room, Adrian DeLuca continued his measured progression through the crowd. His two companions remained nearby, silent sentinels who tracked every movement in the ballroom. Malene noticed how no one approached DeLuca without careful consideration, how conversations shifted when he drew near. He commanded respect that went deeper than wealth alone could purchase. Malene couldn't help but notice how Olivia's eyes occasionally drifted toward her father, a mixture of longing and resentment in her gaze that spoke of years of disappointment. "Your father seems very busy tonight," Malene commented carefully. Olivia's smile turned bitter. "He's always busy. DeLuca Enterprises doesn't run itself, you know." Her signing took on a mocking quality, clearly repeating words she'd seen many times. "He's built quite an empire since my mother died. I'm very proud of him." The rehearsed nature of the statement was heartbreaking. "When did your mother pass away?" Malene asked gently. "When I was 7. That's when everything changed." Olivia's hands slowed, weighted with memory. "Before that, our house was full of music. Ironic, I know. My mother was a concert pianist. She made sure I experienced music in my own way, through vibrations, through watching her face when she played. After she died, the music stopped. Dad buried himself in work, and I became the problem to solve." The problem? The deaf daughter. Olivia's signs became sharp, angular. "The specialists, the surgeries, the therapies. He wanted to fix me. He never learned to sign. Not a single word. We have interpreters at home, rotating faces I barely know. He talks to them, not to me. In his own house, he talks to strangers about me while I'm sitting right there. Malene felt anger surge through her. How could someone so powerful, so clearly capable of moving mountains when he chose, fail so fundamentally at communicating with his own child? I'm sorry, she signed simply, knowing no other words would suffice. Olivia shrugged again. Like I said, it is what it is. She glanced over Malene's shoulder and her expression changed. Speak of the devil. Malene turned to see Adrian DeLuca approaching, his two companions hanging back slightly. Up close, his presence was even more commanding. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they held depths Malene couldn't read. He moved with the economy of someone who never wasted motion, never revealed more than he intended. Olivia, DeLuca said, his voice low but clear enough for lip reading. He spoke directly to his daughter but made no effort to sign. We need you for photographs. He didn't look at Malene, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. His focus remained on Olivia, but it was a strange kind of focus, seeing her without truly seeing her. One of his companions, a solid man with graying hair and watchful eyes, stepped forward at Slyton. The photographer is waiting, Mr. DeLuca. Olivia's face smoothed into the same polite mask she'd worn earlier. Before following her father, she quickly signed to Malene, her hands moving fast. See what I mean? He doesn't even wonder who you are or why you're talking to me. As Olivia walked away to stand beside her father for the photographers, Malene felt determination take root in her chest. She'd seen countless children isolated by their deafness in her work at the hospital, but she'd never encountered someone so completely alone while surrounded by such wealth and privilege. The evening continued its orchestrated progression. Malene watched as Olivia stood dutifully beside her father for her photographs, nodded at appropriate moments, maintained her perfect practice smile. DeLuca's hand rested briefly on his daughter's shoulder for the cameras, but even from a distance, Malene could see the disconnect. A touch without real connection, presence without communication. Not once did DeLuca or anyone else attempt to include Olivia in the conversations swirling around her. She existed in a bubble of silence within the noise, visible but unheard. When the formal portion of the evening concluded and the crowd began to thin, Malene saw Olivia slip away from her father's side. The girl moved quickly, purposefully, toward a side door that appeared to lead to a garden terrace. Making a split-second decision that would alter all their futures, Malene followed. Outside, the Seattle night was cool and clear, the kind of crisp autumn evening that made the city's lights seem sharper against the darkness. The garden terrace stretched along the hotel's western side, illuminated by subtle landscape lighting that created pools of amber glow among carefully manicured plants. The sounds of the gala faded behind thick glass doors, replaced by the distant hum of city traffic and the rustle of wind through decorative grasses. Olivia stood at the stone balustrade, looking out over the city lights that spread below like scattered diamonds. Her shoulders had lost their rigid posture, slumping slightly now that no one was watching. Escaping? Malene signed as she approached. Olivia turned, and the relief on her face was palpable. Just breathing. Sometimes I need to step away from all those moving lips. It's exhausting, pretending I understand conversations I'm not part of. Before Malene could respond, the terrace door opened again. Adrian DeLuca stepped out, his expression shifting from concern to confusion when he saw his daughter wasn't alone. His eyes settled on Malene, really seeing her for the first time, and something flickered in his gaze. Assessment. Calculation. A hint of surprise that anyone would follow his daughter out here. Olivia, it's time to go, he said, looking directly at his daughter but making no effort to sign. Malene saw Olivia's face fall, watched the wall slam up between father and daughter like a physical barrier. In that moment, watching this powerful man fail to bridge the simple distance between himself and his child, Malene made a decision that would change all their lives. Mr. DeLuca, she said aloud, while simultaneously signing for Olivia's benefit. My name is Malene Foster. I'm an interpreter, and I've been talking with your daughter this evening. She's extraordinary. DeLuca's attention fixed on her completely. It was like being caught in a spotlight, intense and slightly unnerving. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw that suggested a man accustomed to control. When he spoke, his voice remained low, almost soft, but it carried absolute authority. "Thank you," he said carefully. "Do you work for the event?" "Yes," Malene replied, still signing her words so Olivia could follow. "But right now, I'm just someone who thinks you should know what you're missing by not being able to communicate with Olivia directly." The temperature on the terrace seemed to drop. DeLuca's expression hardened into something unreadable. Not anger exactly, but something more controlled and therefore more dangerous. Behind him, through the glass doors, Malene saw his two companions straighten slightly, their attention sharpening. But beneath DeLuca's controlled exterior, Malene saw something else. A flicker of shame, quickly masked. A wound that hadn't healed. Olivia's eyes were in her hands frozen in midair. "Miss?" DeLuca prompted, his tone carefully neutral. "Foster," Malene supplied, continuing to sign every word. "Malene Foster." "Miss Foster." He repeated her name as though committing it to memory. "I appreciate your concern, but familia matters aren't discussed with strangers." The Italian word carried weight, a reminder of who he was, what world he came from. Malene felt her professional demeanor slipping, pushed aside by the injustice of watching Olivia shrink back into her shell. "With all due respect, Mr. DeLuca, communication shouldn't be a private matter. It should be accessible. Olivia was standing alone all evening while everyone celebrated your generosity. Don't you see what's wrong with that?" Something genuine flashed across DeLuca's face, hurt, perhaps, or recognition, before his controlled mask settled back into place. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less firm. "You overstep, Miss Foster." He turned to his daughter. "Olivia, we're leaving." He walked back toward the ballroom, clearly expecting his daughter to follow. No discussion, no argument, just the assumption of obedience that came from years of unchallenged authority. Olivia hesitated, her eyes locked with Malene's. She signed quickly, her movements almost frantic. "I'm sorry, he gets defensive about this. It's been this way since the accident." "Accident?" Malene asked, but Olivia was already moving away, pulled by invisible threads of obligation. "Find me at Westridge Academy," Olivia signed in before disappearing through the terrace door. Malene stood alone in the cool night air, her heart pounding. She'd just confronted one of Seattle's most powerful men, someone whose displeasure could end careers. Worse, she might have made things harder for Olivia. The girl would go home with her father, back to that house of silence and interpreters, and Malene's intervention might have accomplished nothing except highlighting what they both lacked. The next morning, Malene woke to 3 missed calls and a terse voicemail from her agency coordinator. "Malene, call me back immediately. There's been a complaint about your conduct at the gala last night." Her stomach dropped. This was exactly what she'd feared. With her apartment rent already 2 weeks overdue and student loans piling up like autumn leaves, she couldn't afford to lose clients. She'd left a stable position at Seattle Public Schools 6 months ago when budget cuts eliminated her role, and freelance work had proven far less reliable than she'd hoped. Most months, she juggled 3 jobs just to cover basics. She returned the call with trembling fingers, prepared to apologize, to explain, to beg for another chance. "I can explain," Malene began, the moment her coordinator answered. "You certainly will explain," came the terse reply. "Adrian DeLuca's office called this morning. They've requested you specifically for a private appointment at his home this afternoon." Malene nearly dropped her phone. "They what?" "I have no idea what happened last night, but somehow you've caught the attention of one of the most influential men in Seattle. This could be huge for the agency, Malene. Don't mess it up." 3 hours later, Malene found herself driving through the imposing iron gates of the DeLuca estate in Medina. Unlike the glass and steel monuments to wealth that dotted the neighborhood, the DeLuca property felt different, older, more substantial. The house itself was a study in controlled power. Dark stone walls, tall windows with heavy frames, a structure that had stood since the 1920s and showed no intention of yielding to modern tastes. The circular driveway curved through mature trees that blocked views from the road. Malene's modest Honda looked absurdly out of place next to the black Maserati parked near the entrance. The house loomed above her, not threatening but solid, permanent, a fortress that had weathered decades while the city changed around it. A woman in her 50s answered the door, not a maid in uniform, but someone who carried herself with quiet authority. Miss Foster, Mr. DeLuca is waiting. This way, please. Malene followed through halls that felt like walking through history. Dark hardwood floors gleamed beneath her feet. The walls held paintings that looked old and valuable, but not in the sterile way of museum pieces. These were personal, chosen, lived with. She noticed a striking abstract canvas featuring bold sweeps of cobalt and gold that seemed out of place among the more traditional pieces. Olivia's work, the woman commented, noticing Malene's interest. She's quite talented. That one's called Remembering Music. Before Malene could respond, they arrived at DeLuca's study. The woman knocked once, opened the door, and gestured Malene inside before disappearing down the hall. The study was exactly what Malene might have imagined. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture worn soft with age, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes that looked read rather than decorative. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, its surface clear except for a laptop, a few papers, and a framed photograph. The windows overlooked Lake Washington, gray water stretching toward distant mountains. Audrey DeLuca stood as she entered. Today he wore dark slacks and a black sweater, no jacket, more relaxed than the previous evening, but no less commanding. His eyes tracked her movement into the room with the same careful attention she'd noticed before. Miss Foster, thank you for coming. His tone was coolly professional, giving nothing away. Mr. DeLuca. Malene remained standing, unsure whether to be defensive or apologetic. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. Please sit. Malene took the offered seat, her mind racing through possibilities. A formal reprimand? A demand that she never approach his daughter again? An NDA about Olivia's condition? She prepared herself for the worst. I owe you an apology, DeLuca said instead, and Malene's prepared defenses crumbled into confusion. I beg your pardon. Your words last night. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he was about to say. They were inappropriate in that setting, but not inaccurate. It's been brought to my attention that I've failed my daughter in significant ways. The vulnerability in his admission caught Malene completely off guard. Up close in the softer light of his study, she could see more clearly the weight he carried. The lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, not just age. His hands rested flat on the desk's surface, and she noticed a gold signet ring on his right hand, old and worn smooth. Sir, I apologize for speaking so bluntly, Malene began. It wasn't my place. Perhaps it was exactly your place, DeLuca interrupted quietly. You're the professional, after all. That's why I asked you here today. He was silent for a moment, as though organizing thoughts he'd never spoken aloud. When he continued, his voice had lost some of its careful control. Olivia lost her hearing in the same car accident that took her mother. She was 7 years old. The doctor said it was nerve damage, permanent, irreversible. He spoke as though reciting medical reports, finding safety in clinical language. I spent the first 2 years after the accident consulting specialists around the world, pursuing every treatment option. I was trying to fix her. Fix her, boys, Malene repeated softly, remembering Olivia's bitter words from the previous night. DeLuca winced. Yes, I couldn't accept that my daughter would never hear again. By the time I finally understood that some things can't be fixed, only adapted to, a pattern had been established. Interpreters, specialists, tutors, people I paid to communicate with her so I wouldn't have to face my own inadequacy. He reached for the framed photograph on his desk, turning it so Malene could see. A younger DeLuca stood with a beautiful woman and a small, beaming child. Olivia, before the accident. They looked genuinely happy, unguarded in a way Malene couldn't imagine DeLuca being now. Catherine, my wife, started teaching Olivia sign language when she was an infant, DeLuca continued, his voice softening when he spoke his dead wife's name. Baby signs, they called it. Catherine believed in communication in all its forms. She was a concert pianist, but she always said music was just one language among many. Olivia mentioned her mother was a pianist, Malene said carefully. DeLuca looked up sharply. She talked about Catherine? Briefly, she said your house was once full of music. He set the photograph down as though it might shatter in his hands. It was. After the accident, I couldn't bear to hear it anymore. I sold Catherine's piano, stopped playing the records she loved. I thought I was protecting Olivia from painful reminders. He paused. But perhaps I was only protecting them. Wow. Malene watched emotions play across his face, grief, regret, something that looked like desperate hope that it wasn't too late to fix what he'd broken. Despite her initial anger toward him, she felt her perspective shifting. This wasn't a man who didn't care about his daughter. This was a man drowning in guilt and grief who'd never learned how to swim. Mr. DeLuca, Malene said carefully, why exactly am I here today? He straightened, and she saw the businessman reasserting control. I want to hire you, Miss Foster, not through your agency, directly. A personal contract. Malene's mind jumped to the obvious conclusion. To interpret for Olivia? No, he said firmly. To teach me to sign. I should have learned years ago. I want to communicate with my daughter directly, without intermediaries. Malene sat back, genuinely surprised. Of all the possibilities she'd considered, this hadn't been among them. That's commendable, Mr. DeLuca, but learning ASL takes time and consistent practice. It's not something you can accomplish in a few sessions. It requires genuine commitment. I understand. His gaze held hers, steady and serious. I'm prepared to commit to regular lessons over the next year at minimum. Twice weekly, more if my schedule allows. He named a figure for her compensation that made Malene's eyes widen. It was more than she'd made in the past 3 months combined. It would solve her immediate financial problems and then some. But money wasn't her primary concern. Before I answer, may I ask, why now? What changed? DeLuca's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Last night I watched my daughter's face when you spoke to her in sign. I realized I haven't seen her look that alive, that present in years. He paused. Then this morning she left this on my desk. He handed Malene a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant, slightly artistic. Dad, I know you're probably angry about what happened with the interpreter last night, but for 10 minutes, someone saw me. Not DeLuca's deaf daughter, not a problem to solve, just me. If you really want to honor Mom's memory with your hospital donations, remember what she always said. True healing begins with being heard. I haven't been heard in a long time. Olivia Malene carefully refolded the note, her throat tight with emotion. She looked up to find DeLuca watching her with an expression that was almost pleading, a crack in his controlled facade. I've spent years throwing money at my daughter's deafness, he said quietly. Building deaf education wings, funding research, donating to organizations, all while failing to make the one investment that truly mattered. It's not too late, Malene said. Olivia is still young. She leaves for college next year. Harvard accepted her early decision. Pride flickered across his face. I have a limited window to repair what I've broken. Malene considered her response carefully. Mr. DeLuca, I'd be happy to teach you ASL, but I need to be clear about something. This won't be a quick fix. Learning to sign is one thing. Rebuilding your relationship with Olivia is another. That takes more than vocabulary. It takes vulnerability. I understand. He rose from his desk, extending his hand. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Malene shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing. The handshake of someone who knew his own strength and controlled it carefully. There's someone else who'd like to speak with you, DeLuca said, moving toward the door. As if on cue, the study door opened and Olivia entered. Seeing Malene, her face transformed with a genuine smile that erased years from her features. You came, she signed, her movements quick with excitement. Your father invited me, Malene replied in sign, watching Olivia's confusion deepen. Olivia's eyes darted between Malene and her father. Why? Am I in trouble for what I said last night? DeLuca cleared his throat awkwardly. I'll let Miss Foster explain. I have a call in 5 minutes. He paused at the door, looking back at his daughter. For a moment, Malene saw him struggle with something. Words that wouldn't come. A gesture he didn't know how to make. Finally, he simply said, Olivia, we'll talk later. After he left, Olivia's hands moved rapidly. What's happening? What did he say? Neither of us is in trouble, Malene assured her. Your father has hired me to teach him ASL. Olivia's hands froze mid-sign, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and immediate skepticism. My father? Learning to sign? You're joking. I'm not. He seems very determined. Olivia sank into the chair her father had vacated, her face a complex mixture of emotions. He won't stick with it. He never does with anything involving my deafness. He'll have good intentions for a week, maybe two, then something at work will come up and he'll disappear again. Maybe this time will be different, Malene suggested gently. Why would it be? Olivia's signs were sharp with years of disappointment. What makes you think this time is special? Malene thought about DeLuca's face when he'd looked at his daughter's painting, when he'd read her note, when he'd admitted his failures. Because this time, he's not trying to fix you. He's trying to fix himself. 3 weeks later, Malene sat across from Adrian DeLuca in his study, watching him struggle through fingerspelling. His brow furrowed in concentration as his fingers laboriously formed each letter, MEEETINGATTHREE. Good, Malene signed and spoke simultaneously, her standard teaching method. But remember, there's a specific sign for meeting that would be faster than spelling it out. DeLuca frowned as he attempted the sign, his fingers refusing to cooperate. This is impossible, he muttered, dropping his hands. I'm too old to learn a new language. You learned Mandarin for business deals, Malene reminded him. She'd learned about his linguistic accomplishments during their sessions. He spoke Italian from childhood, Spanish fluently, and had working knowledge of 3 other languages. That was different. I was younger, and it was, he trailed off, aware of what he'd been about to say. More important, Malene supplied, keeping her tone neutral. DeLuca had the grace to look ashamed. I was going to say easier, but you were right to call me out. Over these weeks, Malene had discovered layers to Adrian DeLuca that his public persona never revealed. He was brilliant in business, but emotionally stunted by grief, capable of tremendous focus, yet blind to what was right in front of him. He could command a room full of powerful men with a sentence, but a simple sign like, I love you, left him paralyzed. Let's try a different approach, Malene suggested. Instead of business vocabulary, let's practice something you might actually want to say to Olivia. DeLuca looked distinctly uncomfortable. Such as? How about I'm proud of you? That's something every child needs to hear. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. Does she think I'm not proud of her? Malene chose her words carefully. Mr. DeLuca, when was the last time you told her so directly? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Let me show you. Malene demonstrated the sign, a simple but meaningful gesture. I'm proud of you. DeLuca watched intently, then mimicked her movements. Despite his complaints, he was actually progressing faster than most adult learners. His business acumen served him well. He approached learning with methodical discipline, practicing between sessions, taking notes on his phone. Perfect, Malene encouraged. Now try, I love you. The sign was simple, pinky, index finger, and thumb extended. But something about it overwhelmed DeLuca. After attempting it once, he abruptly stood and walked to the window, his back rigid. Mr. DeLuca? I haven't said those words to Olivia since Catherine died, he'd admitted, his voice low. Not aloud, and certainly not in sign. Why not? He turned, and for once, his carefully maintained composure cracked completely. Because every time I look at her, I see Catherine. I see what we lost. What I failed to protect. Understanding dawned on Malene. The accident. You were driving. DeLuca nodded once, sharply. Black ice on I-90. A semi jackknifed ahead of us. I swerved to avoid it, but we hit the guardrail. His voice became clinical, detached. Catherine died on impact. Olivia was in the back seat. The trauma to her head caused damage to her auditory nerves. When she woke up in the hospital 3 days later, she couldn't hear anything. That wasn't your fault, Malene said gently. Tell that to my 7-year-old daughter who woke up in a silent world without her mother. Bitterness edged his words. For months after, she would scream at night. Horrible, raw sounds. She couldn't hear herself, couldn't modulate her voice. I couldn't comfort her. Nothing I did helped. He returned to his chair but didn't sit, instead gripping its back. The only thing that calmed her was drawing. She'd draw for hours, these chaotic, dark pictures that her therapist said expressed her trauma. Colors bleeding into each other, no clear forms, just emotion poured onto paper. And now she's an artist, Malene observed quietly. A talented one. Pride broke through his pain. She's been accepted to Harvard's visual arts program. Catherine would have been, his voice caught. Catherine would have been so proud. The lesson continued, but Maline's mind kept returning to what DeLuca had revealed. The accident explained so much. His guilt, his emotional withdrawal, his desperate attempts to fix Olivia's deafness while avoiding the deeper wound between them. He'd been trying to undo the unfixable while ignoring what he actually could repair, their relationship. Later that afternoon, Maline met Olivia at a coffee shop near Westridge Academy. These meetings had become regular occurrences, initially focused on discussing DeLuca's progress, but evolving into genuine friendship. Olivia had been starved for connection with someone who understood her world, and Maline found herself caring about the girl beyond professional obligation. "So," Olivia signed after they'd settled with their drinks, "how's my father doing? Still terrible?" "Actually, he's improving," Maline replied truthfully. "He's more dedicated than you might think." Olivia rolled her eyes. "He approaches everything like a business acquisition. Study it, master it, move on to the next challenge. Is that so bad if it means he's learning to communicate with you?" "I'll believe it when I see it," Olivia signed. But Maline noticed the hope hiding behind her skepticism. A fragile thing, easily crushed but refusing to die completely. "He told me about the accident today," Maline revealed carefully. Olivia's hands stilled. "He never talks about that. I think he carries a lot of guilt." "He should," Olivia signed, her movement suddenly sharp. "Not for the accident. That wasn't his fault, but for what came after, for disappearing when I needed him most." "What do you mean?" Olivia's fingers danced through a complex series of signs, revealing more emotion than her carefully controlled face. "After Mom died, Dad sent me to specialized boarding schools for the deaf. Not one school, several. First in Oregon, then California, then Massachusetts. He said they were the best programs, that I'd get better education and therapy than I could at home." She paused, looking out the coffee shop window at students passing by. "He visited on designated parents' weekends, always with an interpreter. We became strangers to each other. When I finally came home for good at 15, because I threatened to emancipate myself if he didn't let me, it was like moving in with a polite acquaintance, not my father." Maline felt her heart ache for both DeLucas, a father and daughter separated not just by deafness, but by shared grief they couldn't express to each other. "You never told me why you left your school job," Olivia signed, clearly wanting to change the subject. Maline hesitated before answering honestly. "Budget cuts were the official reason, but the truth is I was becoming too personally involved with the deaf students. My supervisor said I needed better professional boundaries." Olivia's expression was curious. "What does that mean?" "It means I did things like drive deaf kids home when their parents forgot to pick them up, or advocate too aggressively for resources the school claimed they couldn't afford. I made administrators uncomfortable by pointing out how often deaf students were left out of assemblies and events because no one arranged interpretation." Maline shrugged. "Maybe my supervisor was right. I've never been good at emotional distance." "Is that why you confronted my father at the gala?" Olivia asked. "Probably," Maline admitted. "It wasn't very professional of me." "It was exactly what I needed," Olivia countered firmly. "Even if nothing had changed with my father, you saw me. That matters more than you know." Their conversation shifted to Olivia's art portfolio and her upcoming senior showcase. As they talked, Maline couldn't help noticing how Olivia lit up when discussing her work. The same passionate intensity she glimpsed in DeLuca when he spoke about his late wife, or occasionally when he managed a particularly difficult sign correctly. "You should come to my showcase next Friday," Olivia signed. "It's at the school gallery. Small event, mostly parents and faculty, but I'd like you to be there." "I'd love to," Maline replied. "Will your father be there?" Olivia's expression clouded. "He's been invited. He always makes an appearance at school events. Donations to make, hands to shake, the usual performance. But he doesn't really see my art." "What do you mean?" "He sees it as therapy, not art. A hobby, not a calling." Olivia's signs carried weight. "He thinks Harvard's business school would be more practical than the visual arts program. He hasn't said it directly, but I can read it in his face whenever I mention my plans." Have you told him how important art is to you? How? Olivia's hands moved with frustrated emphasis. We barely communicate about what time dinner is served. How am I supposed to explain that art is the only way I've found to express everything I can't say? That painting is my voice when I feel voiceless? Malene leaned forward. You could show him. Your art speaks volumes, Olivia. Maybe it could bridge the gap that words haven't. The following Friday, Malene arrived at Westridge Academy's gallery 30 minutes before the showcase was scheduled to begin. The space was already buzzing with activity as students made final adjustments to their displays. Teachers offered last-minute encouragement, and early arriving parents claimed the best viewing positions. Olivia spotted Malene immediately and waved her over to a stunning collection of canvases dominating the gallery's center wall. Malene's breath caught as she took in the series. They were extraordinary, abstract compositions that somehow conveyed profound emotion through color and movement alone. Olivia had created a visual language more eloquent than any words could be. Deep blues swirled with gold, harsh reds softened into pinks, blacks gave way gradually to light. Each painting felt like watching emotion itself take physical form. Olivia, these are incredible, Malene signed truthfully. The centerpiece was particularly arresting, a large canvas divided into two distinct sections. The left side depicted chaotic darkness, slashed with aggressive strokes of red and black, fragments that suggested broken things. The right side showed a gradual emergence of blues and golds, a sense of order slowly evolving from chaos. Upon closer inspection, Malene realized the chaotic section contained barely discernible words painted in various scripts, while the ordered side featured what appeared to be hands-forming sign language. The title card read simply, After Silence. It's about the accident, Olivia signed, watching Malene's reaction carefully. The moment everything changed. The left side is what I remember from before. Words, sounds, all the things I lost. The right side is learning to find meaning in silence, in signs, in a new way of being. The words, Malene said, stepping closer. Are those things you remember hearing? Olivia nodded. My mother's voice saying, good morning. Music playing. My father laughing. He used to laugh before. The signs on the right are the new language I had to learn. It's about loss and adaptation. Ending and beginning. Before Malene could respond, a murmur passed through the gallery like wind through grass. Conversations paused. Students straightened. Teachers moved to more professional postures. Adrian DeLuca had arrived. He entered the gallery with his usual quiet authority, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than most families spent on rent. No tie today, Malene noticed, a small concession to the casual nature of the event. His two ever-present companions remained near the entrance, their eyes scanning the room with professional vigilance. The school's headmaster, a nervous man in his 60s, hurried to greet DeLuca with effusive thanks for his continued support of Westridge's arts program. Malene knew from Olivia that DeLuca had donated substantially to the school, enough to ensure his daughter received accommodations and support, enough to guarantee his calls were always returned. Olivia's face fell slightly as she watched her father being led through the gallery. See, she signed to Malene, always the benefactor, never the father. But as the headmaster attempted to guide DeLuca toward a different section of student work, something unexpected happened. DeLuca stopped mid-step, said something that made the headmaster look surprised, and then walked directly toward Olivia's display. Your father is coming this way, Malene signed quickly. Olivia straightened, her expression smoothing into the guarded mask Malene had seen at the gala. But she didn't see what Malene did, the way DeLuca's eyes widened as he took in Olivia's paintings, the flash of recognition when he read the title, After Silence, the emotions that crossed his face too quickly to name. DeLuca stood before the centerpiece for a long moment, studying it with an intensity that made the surrounding conversations fade into background noise. Malene could almost see him processing the visual story his daughter had painted, the chaos of loss, the struggle toward meaning, the transformation of silence from emptiness into its own kind of language. Then, in full view of the gathering crowd, Adrian DeLuca raised his hands. His movements were slow, slightly awkward, but deliberate and clear. He signed, "These are beautiful. I'm proud of you." The gallery went absolutely silent. Olivia's shock was visible, her hands frozen at her sides, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment that stretched too long, Malene feared she wouldn't respond, that the surprise would paralyze her. Then, with trembling fingers, Olivia signed back, "Thank you." It was painfully basic compared to the complex thoughts both clearly wanted to express. DeLuca's signing was elementary, his vocabulary limited to what Malene had taught him over their weeks of lessons. But in that moment, as father and daughter looked at each other with unguarded emotion, for perhaps the first time in a decade, Malene understood that something fundamental had shifted. Around them, the gallery erupted in applause, not for the exchange itself, which most hadn't understood, but for the visible emotion of the moment. Teachers smiled, students whispered. The headmaster beamed as though he'd orchestrated something profound. But Malene barely noticed the crowd. She watched Olivia's face as tears began to slip down her cheeks. Watched DeLuca reach out hesitantly and rest his hand on his daughter's shoulder. Not for cameras this time, but because he didn't know how else to bridge the distance between them. What happened next would shatter this fragile moment of connection and force both DeLucas to confront the true depth of their estrangement. The showcase continued its planned program. Olivia was reluctantly pulled away by her art teacher to speak with other attendees and prospective college representatives. DeLuca remained in front of her paintings, studying each one with the same intensity he might bring to a business contract, as though he could decode years of his daughter's inner life through careful examination. Malene approached cautiously. "You didn't tell me she was this talented." "I did, actually," Malene replied gently. "You just weren't ready to hear it." He acknowledged this with a slight nod, never taking his eyes from after silence. "These aren't just good for a high school student. They're extraordinary by any standard." He gestured to the centerpiece. "This one especially. It's raw, honest, painful." "She's been trying to tell you things through her art for years," Malene said. "It's been her voice when she felt you couldn't hear her." DeLuca's jaw tightened. "I've been a fool, haven't I?" Before Malene could respond, the gallery lights dimmed slightly, signaling the formal start of the evening's presentations. The headmaster took center stage, welcoming everyone and thanking the evening's special guests, particularly Mr. DeLuca, whose generous contributions to the school's arts program had made events like this possible. "And now, Tatiana," the headmaster continued, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality, "it is my great pleasure to announce this year's recipient of the Catherine DeLuca Memorial Scholarship for Excellence in Visual Arts." Malene saw Olivia freeze across the room, her conversation with a college representative forgotten. This was clearly unexpected. This scholarship, the headmaster explained for those unfamiliar, was established 5 years ago by Mr. Adrian DeLuca in honor of his late wife, Catherine, who was a passionate believer in the transformative power of the arts. The scholarship provides a full year of advanced study at the Press Institute of Fine Arts following graduation. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Such an opportunity was extraordinary, prestigious, expensive, life-changing. This year's recipient has demonstrated remarkable talent, emotional depth, and technical skill beyond her years. Her work speaks a universal language that transcends barriers of communication. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to announce that the Catherine DeLuca Memorial Scholarship goes to Miss Olivia DeLuca. Applause erupted throughout the gallery. Proud parents smiled. Teachers nodded approvingly. The college representatives looked impressed. But Olivia stood motionless, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to anger. Her eyes found her father across the room, and Malene saw accusation in that gaze, a betrayal too large for the public space to contain. All eyes turned to Olivia, waiting for her to approach the podium, to accept the honor with grace and gratitude. The applause continued, expectant. Instead, Olivia turned and walked quickly out of the gallery. The applause faltered, died. Confused whispers rose in its place. The headmaster's smile froze, uncertainty creeping across his features as he looked to DeLuca for guidance. After a moment of visible tension, DeLuca stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling difficult situations. "Thank you all for your patience and understanding. My daughter is understandably overwhelmed by this honor. If you'll excuse me." He followed Olivia's path out of the gallery, leaving a wake of confused whispers and speculative glances. Malene hesitated only a moment, professional distance warred with personal concern, before going after them both. She found them in an empty classroom down the hall, the door half open. Olivia's hands were flying in rapid, furious signs that Malene knew DeLuca couldn't possibly follow at his beginner's level. Her face was flushed, tears of anger streaking her cheeks. How could you? Olivia was signing, her movements so forceful they seemed to cut the air. Using Mom's name like that without even telling me. Making decisions about my future without asking me. Just like always. Deciding what's best for Olivia without ever asking what Olivia wants. DeLuca looked helplessly at Malene when she entered. I can't understand her when she signs that fast. Malene stepped forward, her role shifting from teacher to translator. She's upset that you created a scholarship in her mother's name without discussing it with her, and that you're making decisions about her future without her input. DeLuca's expression hardened into something Malene recognized from their first meeting, controlled displeasure masking deeper hurt. I thought she'd be pleased. This is a prestigious opportunity. The Paris Institute is one of the finest art schools in the world. I don't want to go to Paris, Olivia signed vehemently, and Malene translated aloud. I've been accepted at Harvard. I've planned for this for years. I've already chosen my classes, found roommates, imagined my entire freshman year. And you just decide, without asking me, that I should spend a year in Paris instead? Harvard will still be there after, DeLuca said, his tone taking on the reasonable quality of someone explaining obvious logic. This is an opportunity to study with master artists, to grow your skills before university. That's not the point. Olivia's signs were so forceful that Malene struggled to translate their full emotional weight. You've done this my entire life, decided what's best for me without ever asking what I want. The schools, the doctors, the therapies, everything decided by you. For me, without me. I'm your father, DeLuca said, and Malene heard his control beginning to crack. It's my job to... To what? Olivia demanded through Malene's translation. Control me? Ship me off whenever it's convenient? First all those boarding schools, and now Paris? Can't you see the pattern? DeLuca flinched as if struck. Those schools were to give you the best education possible for your situation. My situation? Olivia's eyes flashed. You mean my deafness? Or the fact that you couldn't bear to look at me after Mom died? The raw accusation hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. The classroom fell absolutely silent. That's not true, DeLuca said, but his voice was hollow, unconvincing even to himself. Isn't it? Olivia's hands trembled as she signed. You sent me away for 9 years, Dad. 9 years. You visited on parents' weekends with your interpreters and your forced smiles, and then you disappeared again. Do you know what that felt like? To be 7 years old, suddenly deaf, my mother dead, and then abandoned by my father too? Malene translated faithfully, though each word felt like driving a knife deeper into an already bleeding wound. She saw DeLuca's careful control finally, completely shatter. I was trying to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. I thought those specialized schools would give you what I couldn't. What couldn't you give me? Olivia demanded. Love? Presence? A father? Understanding. The word burst from DeLuca with the force of years of suppressed emotion. I couldn't understand what you were going through, Olivia. I couldn't help you. Every time you tried to tell me something and I couldn't understand, every time you cried and I couldn't comfort you, it was like losing you all over again. Like failing Catherine all over again. His composure was completely gone now, his face raw with grief and guilt. You'd wake up screaming in the night, and I'd run to your room and you couldn't hear me telling you everything would be okay. You'd look at me with such fear, such confusion, and nothing I did helped. Nothing. I was useless to you. Olivia stared at her father, her anger visibly warring with something else. Understanding, perhaps, or a grief that matched his own. So instead of learning how to talk to me, she signed more slowly now, with Malene translating, you sent me away and threw money at the problem. DeLuca didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority. I know how it looks, but Olivia, I didn't send you away because I didn't want you. I sent you away because I was terrified of failing you worse by keeping you with me. How could you fail me worse than abandonment? I was broken after your mother died, DeLuca admitted, and Malene saw tears gathering in his eyes, the first time she'd witnessed such vulnerability from him. Drowning in guilt, barely functioning, I convinced myself you'd be better off with professionals who understood deafness, who could give you a community and support system I couldn't provide. I thought I was doing the right thing. I needed my father, Olivia signed, her own tears flowing freely now. Not community, not specialists, just you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. I know, DeLuca said. I know that now, but then he trailed off, spreading his hands helplessly. I didn't know how to be what you needed. You didn't try, Olivia signed, but her anger was ebbing, replaced by the deeper grief beneath. You just gave up and sent me away. You're right, DeLuca admitted. I took the coward's way out. And then, when you were finally home, when you came back at 15, we were strangers to each other. I didn't know how to bridge that gap. I still don't. A long silence stretched between father and daughter, filled with a decade of misunderstandings and missed connections. Across that silence, Malene could almost see the weight of everything left unsaid. Apologies never offered, love never expressed, a relationship allowed to atrophy through fear and grief. Finally, Olivia signed, the scholarship. Did you really create it for Mom? DeLuca nodded. 5 years ago, she always believed art could heal wounds nothing else could touch. She would have been so proud of your talent, Olivia. So incredibly proud. But why Paris? Olivia's signs were gentler now, more curious than angry. Why now? DeLuca looked at the floor, then back at his daughter. When he spoke, the honesty in his admission was almost painful. Because I saw your Harvard acceptance letter at your desk last month. Because I realized you'd be leaving soon, and I'd missed so much already. Because, he paused, struggling with the words. Because part of me thought if you were in Paris instead of Cambridge, I'd have another year to learn how to talk to you before you were gone for good. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its raw vulnerability. Olivia's expression softened, understanding dawning. Dad, I wasn't planning to disappear from your life after high school. Weren't you? He asked quietly. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had. Malene watched as understanding passed between father and daughter, perhaps the first real understanding they'd shared in years. The anger had burned away, leaving only grief and the fragile possibility of healing. I don't want to go to Paris, Olivia signed again, but gently now. Harvard has been my dream. The visual arts program there is perfect for what I want to do. DeLuca nodded slowly, accepting. Then Harvard it is. The scholarship can go to another student, someone whose dreams it actually fits. But, Olivia continued, her hands moving carefully, maybe we could go to Paris together sometime. Mom always wanted to take me there. She had this whole plan, the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, all the places her favorite composers lived and worked. Maybe we could do that trip. Together. DeLuca's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with an emotion he couldn't quite contain. I would like that very much. Hesitantly, as though approaching something fragile that might shatter, he raised his hands. His signing was slow, deliberate, but clear. I'm sorry I failed you. I love you, Olivia. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks as she watched her father's hands form the words she'd waited years to see. She stepped forward without hesitation and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce embrace. DeLuca held her tightly, his own eyes closed against tears. Over Olivia's shoulder, he caught Malene's gaze and mouthed silently, Thank you. Malene slipped quietly from the classroom, giving father and daughter the privacy they deserved. As she walked back toward the gallery, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction settling in her chest, the knowledge that she'd played a small but crucial part in healing a wound that had festered for far too long. Sometimes, she thought, the most important translations weren't between languages at all. They were between hearts. 6 months later, Malene sat in the audience at Westridge Academy's graduation ceremony. The day was perfect Seattle spring, clear skies, warm sun, the kind of weather that made everyone forget about the months of rain. Parents filled the rows of chairs, cameras ready, proud smiles fixed on faces. As valedictorian, Olivia delivered her address in sign language, with a professional interpreter voicing her words for the hearing audience. But Malene noticed something significant. Adrian DeLuca, sitting in the front row in a rare public display of casual dress, dark slacks and a sweater instead of his usual suit, was watching his daughter's hands, not the interpreter's mouth. He was following along, understanding at least some of what Olivia signed directly. Olivia's speech was eloquent and moving, touching on themes of communication, connection, and the courage required to bridge divides. She spoke about different languages, not just ASL and English, but the languages of art, music, emotion, grief. About how silence could be its own form of communication when you learn to listen differently. But it was her closing words that brought tears to Malene's eyes. In a world that often values only what can be heard, Olivia signed, her movements graceful and sure. I've learned that the most important conversations happen in silence, in the space between words, in art, in gestures of love that transcend language. My journey from silence to expression wouldn't have been possible without three people. She paused, her eyes finding her father in the front row. My mother, who taught me that music exists even for those who can't hear it. My father, who learned that love doesn't always need sound to be understood. And Malene Foster, who showed us both that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The audience erupted in applause. Olivia descended from the podium to receive her diploma, and Malene saw DeLuca stand, signing "I'm proud of you," for his daughter to see across the crowd. After the ceremony, amid the celebration of graduating families, Malene found herself face-to-face with both DeLucas. Olivia still wore her graduation gown, her cap slightly askew, her face glowing with happiness. DeLuca stood beside his daughter, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, a proximity that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "We have something to show you," Olivia signed excitedly. DeLuca pulled out his phone and opened a photo gallery. The images showed a spacious studio flooded with natural light, high ceilings, large windows overlooking the lake, walls painted white to show art to best advantage. Easels stood ready. Shelves held organized supplies. A comfortable chair sat near the windows, perfect for contemplating work in progress. "We've converted the East Wing sunroom into Olivia's studio," DeLuca explained, his hands forming the signs along with his words. "Still simple, still imperfect, but improving. She'll use it when she's home from Harvard." "It's beautiful," Malene said sincerely. The images showed a space designed for serious work, not a hobby room or therapeutic activity. It was a studio for an artist. "And that's not all," Olivia signed, barely containing her excitement. "Tell her, Dad." DeLuca smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face, making him look years younger. "I've established a foundation in Catherine's name, the Catherine DeLuca Foundation for Deaf Arts and Education. We'll be funding art therapy programs, sign language education, and scholarships for deaf students pursuing creative fields." And, Olivia added proudly, "all foundation staff will be required to learn ASL. No exceptions, no more talking around deaf people instead of to them." "That's wonderful," Malene said, meaning it. "Both of you must be very proud." "We are," DeLuca replied, his hands and voice moving together with increasing confidence. "And we'd like you to be part of it, Malene, as program director if you're interested." Malene stared at them in shock. "Program director? Me? Who better?" Olivia signed. "You're the one who taught us that communication isn't just about words or signs. It's about actually seeing each other. Really seeing, not just looking." DeLuca nodded. "We need someone who understands both the deaf community and the practical challenges of building accessible programs. Someone who's not afraid to call out failures, especially when they're uncomfortable to acknowledge." Malene looked between them, the brilliant, resilient young woman and the powerful man who had finally learned the most important language of all. She thought about her small apartment, her freelance work juggling multiple part-time positions, the constant financial stress. She thought about all the deaf children she'd worked with over the years, the systemic failures she'd witnessed, the difference a well-funded, properly run foundation could make. But more than any of that, she thought about Olivia standing alone at the gala 6 months ago, and this same young woman now standing beside her father, both of them looking at Malene with hope and trust. "I'd be honored," she said, signing and speaking the words simultaneously. Olivia threw her arms around Malene in a tight hug. Over her shoulder, Malene saw DeLuca extend his hand, but when she took it, he surprised her by pulling her into a brief embrace, the kind of gesture that would have been unthinkable from the controlled, distant man she'd first confronted on that hotel terrace. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing what I was too blind to see, for having the courage to speak when silence would have been easier." As the afternoon sun slanted across the graduation lawn and families celebrated around them, Malene understood that this was just a beginning. There would be challenges ahead: running a foundation, building programs, navigating the complex intersection of the deaf and hearing worlds. DeLuca and Olivia's relationship would continue to require work, patience, the daily choice to communicate even when it was difficult. But for the first time in a decade, they would face those challenges together. Not as strangers connected by blood and tragedy, but as father and daughter learning to truly see each other. Sometimes, Malene reflected, the most profound changes begin with the simplest gesture, reaching across silence and saying, "I see you." And sometimes, if you are very fortunate, someone reaches back.